Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's the CD guy, Johnny Z here. Thank you so much for tuning back into the channel, and today it's time for Ranking of the Grave, a video you guys voted on in the community tab. Thank you so much for voting. Today, I'm going to be ranking Black Sabbath studio albums from worst to best. There are 19 studio albums in the Black Sabbath catalog, so that said, let's get started here with my number 19, my least favorite Black Sabbath record, which has got to be 1995's Forbidden. And, a lot of bands hit their rock bottom in the 90s, a lot of classic metal bands, I should say, and Black Sabbath was no different here with Forbidden. This is the final album of the Tony Martin era of Sabbath, but, I'm generally a fan of the Tony Martin stuff, and this album is definitely not Tony Martin's fault. He does a fine job on vocals here, but the material he was working with is really poor, in my opinion, and the album, because of it, suffers. Tony Iommi made a lot of poor decisions here on this record. The production is terrible. I think the riffs are pretty generic. The lyrics are pretty uninteresting as well, and that yielded some really unimpressive songs, in my opinion, that really have no re-listenable quality to it whatsoever. Also, you have a really random collaboration with Ice-T, which could have been cool, but just kind of feels lackluster and forced, in my opinion. So, in general here, this is a really poor album. I think it's abysmal. It's my least favorite Black Sabbath album, and not a record I ever really want to own. Next up on the list here at number 18, let's just get this one out of the way. I'm going to go with 1978's Never Say Die. Really disappointing album here, and a really abysmal way for Ozzy Osbourne to go out here as the lead vocalist for Black Sabbath. He would not appear on lead vocals for another Sabbath studio album until 13, decades later, but really poor record here, and this album was marred with infighting within the band, as well as Ozzy Osbourne departing the group. The band brought in Dave Walker, and then Ozzy decided to come back, so a lot of turmoil when it comes to who was going to be on lead vocals here fronting the band, but the end product was a band in shambles, I think, and definitely does show on this album with some really forgettable tracks like Johnny Blade, Junior's Eyes, Air Dance, Over to You, Swing of the Chain, and this album is also filled with instrumentals as well, because Ozzy Osbourne did not want to record vocals for a number of tracks, so there's also that, which is a bad sign as well. There is one classic song on here, and that is Never Say Die, the title track, but in general, this is a very weak album in my opinion, and a really poor way to close out the 70s for Black Sabbath, so coming in at number 18 on the list, I'm going to go with Never Say Die. Definitely one of the worst albums in the Sabbath catalog, in my opinion. Coming in at number 17 here on the list, I'm going to go with 7 Star from 1986, and, at this point, Black Sabbath had really become a one-man operation, with Tony Iommi calling all the shots. Geezer Butler had departed the group as well, following the Born Again tour from 1984, so really, like I said, one-man operation, but the lineup on this record is pretty strong, in addition to Tony Iommi, obviously. Also on this record, you have Jeff Nichols, Eric Singer, Dave Spitz, and then formerly of Deep Purple, Glenn Hughes on lead vocals. So a pretty promising lineup, but unfortunately this album would fail to meet all expectations on every account, in my opinion at least, and like I said, there are some solid tracks. I do enjoy No Stranger to Love, which I think is a really underrated Sabbath deep cut. Pretty out of character for them, but I think it's solid nonetheless. In for the Kill and Danger Zone are pretty solid as well, but nothing really great on this record, in my opinion. Nothing that really stands out as a fantastic classic Sabbath track, and unfortunately, I think a lot of that does have to do with the fact that Glenn Hughes was dealing with some pretty bad substance abuse issues at the time that definitely did mar this record, and then, of course, on this following tour, which would just be a disaster. But all things considered, it's not a bad record, just a lot of wasted potential and good ideas that just were not given enough time, in my opinion. A Black Sabbath record that was originally supposed to be a Tony Iommi solo album, which explains why he's standing alone on the cover here for this record, but in general, just not a great Sabbath record. Coming in at number 17 here on the list, I'm going to go with 1986's 7th Star. From here on out, these albums all range from good to great, in my opinion, so that said, next at number 16, I'm going to go with Cross Purposes from 1994. This album does mark the return of Tony Martin to the group, following Ronnie James Dio's second departure from the band, so Tony Martin back here with Black Sabbath, and like I was saying before, I think a majority of the Tony Martin era of Black Sabbath is pretty underrated here, including this record, which I think is very solid and is full of some really underrated Sabbath deep cuts, such as Eyewitness, Cross of Thorns, Virtual Death, Immaculate Deception, Back to Eden, Cardinal Sin, and Evil Eyes. So some really great tracks in here, in my opinion. A criminally underrated and overlooked record here is Cross Purposes from 1994, and unfortunately I don't own a majority of the Tony Martin records because they're pretty pretty hard to find these days, which is why I'm hoping that Black Sabbath do eventually put out that rumored box set, because a lot of those albums are really underrated, except for Forbidden, of course, which I think is terrible. But aside from that, I do enjoy the Tony Martin era here, and coming in at number 16 on the list, I'm going to go with 1994's Cross Purposes. Following that up with my number 15, I'm going to go with the Eternal Idol from 1987. Another really underrated Sabbath record here, and this album would kickstart the Tony Martin era. Of course, initially this album was intended to be recorded with Ray Gillan on lead vocals, but he would depart the band shortly after during the recording here of this record, so Tony Martin was brought in instead to reconstruct the vocals and finish the album, and I think Martin does a great job here, and there are some awesome standout tracks that never get talked about, but I think are great, such as The Shining, Ancient Warrior, Glory Ride, Born to Lose, Lost Forever, and then the title track, Eternal Idol, to close things out. Really great stuff here on this underrated Sabbath record. Like I was saying before, the Tony Martin stuff gets very overlooked, so I'm going to go with the pretty underrated Eternal Idol from 1987. Sticking with the Tony Martin era here for my number 14, I'm going to go with 1990's Tear, and, I've heard people also call it Tire or Tur, but I'm going to call it Tear, and I could be wrong about that, but as far as I'm concerned, there are a number of different pronunciations for this record here, but another really killer, underrated Sabbath record from the Tony Martin era, an album that I enjoy and unfortunately don't own right now, but definitely hope to pick it up in the future. I know this album is pretty hard to come by these days, but there are some great tracks on here that I really enjoy, some super underrated deep cuts, such as The Lawmaker, Jerusalem, The Sabbath Stones, The Battle of Tears, an awesome instrumental, Odin's Court, Valhalla, and Heaven in Black as well. So some really great tracks in here, in my opinion, and definitely an underrated and overlooked album in the Sabbath catalog. From the Tony Martin era, coming in at number 14, I'm going to go with Tear. I swear this was just a coincidence, but coming in at number 13 here, I'm going to go with Black Sabbath's final album, 13, and I talked about this a few days ago on the channel when I was counting down the top 10 greatest final metal albums, which I'll leave the link to that video in the description box below. But I think this is a really misunderstood Black Sabbath record, because a lot of people write this album off as a pretty uninteresting, lazy attempt by Sabbath to replicate some of their past works on here. Nothing really new or interesting on this record, but for me, I enjoy it because I kind of view this record as a tribute to the classic Sabbath sound here and a number of classic Sabbath records through new material here from 3/4 of the original band, which I think is really cool. And when you look at it from that perspective, I think it does definitely make this album a little bit more enjoyable. But there are some awesome tracks on here, such as End of the Beginning, God is Dead, Loner, Age of Reason, Live Forever, Dear Father as well to close things out. And really my only criticism of this record is the fact that Bill Ward does not appear to round out the original 4 guys in Black Sabbath, because they didn't want to pay him enough or whatever. Unfortunately, Bill Ward does not appear here, and that definitely could have only made this album better, but I think nonetheless it's a very solid record and a great way for Sabbath to go out here. From 2013, my number 13 on the list is 13. A lot of people tend to overlook my number 12 on the list, Technical Ecstasy, when it comes to Black Sabbath's great run of records in the 70s, and a lot of people consider Sabbath's great streak of albums from the 70s to go from Black Sabbath, their debut, only up to Sabotage. But for me, I would definitely include this album here in that great streak of records. Really underrated stuff on here. I think it's a very fine album that not a lot of people talk about when it comes to the band's 70s catalog, but I enjoy tracks like Backstreet Kids, It's Alright, which features Bill Ward on lead vocals, which is definitely fun and something different. Gypsy is a great track. Rock and Roll Doctor, very Kiss, but a fine song nonetheless. She's Gone, Dirty Women as well, which is the classic off of this record. Dirty Women has got an awesome guitar solo by Tony Iommi, so some really great stuff on this album, in my opinion, that gets very overlooked and underappreciated, and definitely should be considered a classic record in that string of albums in the 70s by Sabbath. So coming in at number 12 on the list, I'm going to go with 1976's Technical Ecstasy. Fast forward a decade later, Black Sabbath was a very different band upon the release of my number 11, 1989's The Headless Cross here, and definitely the best album from the Tony Martin era, in my opinion, and an album that I feel, had it been released with Ronnie James Dio on lead vocals, or even Ozzy Osbourne, definitely would be talked about a lot more. But because Black Sabbath with Tony Martin is very underappreciated, I think this album tends to not get talked about nearly as much as it should, in my opinion. But there are some absolutely killer songs on this record, including Headless Cross, Devil and Daughter, When Death Calls, Kill in the Spirit World, Black Moon, and then Nightwing, which Nightwing definitely does remind me a little bit of Children of the Sea with that guitar intro by Tony Iommi. But great stuff on this record, in my opinion. Really underrated, deserving of a spot here, close to the top 10. So coming in at number 11, I'm going to go with what I think is the best album from the Tony Martin era the Headless Cross from 1989. Moving into the top 10 now, coming in at number 10, I'm going to go with Dehumanizer from 1992, the reunion with the Mob Rules lineup here, that of course being Ronnie James Dio, Tony Iommi, Geezer Butler, and Vinny Appice on the drums. Great lineup here, and another amazing album with some standout tracks being Computer God, After All the Dead, TV Crimes is really fun, has an awesome memorable music video too. Also, some other standouts include Master of Insanity, Letters from Earth as well. So, some really strong traction here in my opinion, and it is my least favorite album from the Mob Rules lineup and from the records that were released with Ronnie James Dio in the band. Not quite on par with the first two records released with Dio during his 10 years with Sabbath, but still a very solid album here, really enjoyable, and some classic stuff on here. So, coming in at number 10, I'm going to go with 1992's Dehumanizer. You know, throughout this video, I've been talking a lot about albums that I think are pretty underrated, but next to number 9 here, I'm going to go with the most underrated Black Sabbath album of all time, in my opinion. That is 1983's Born Again, with Ian Gillan, formerly of Deep Purple, on lead vocals here. The band entered a new era following Ronnie James Dio's departure and his subsequent solo career, and, you know, Sabbath delivered again with another great album with a new lead vocalist here. Some awesome tracks like Trashed, Disturbing the Priest, Zero the Hero, Born Again, the title track is awesome, Hotline, Keep It Warm. Great tracks on here from beginning to end. It's a fun album, it's a great listen, and I only wish that this lineup would have lasted a little bit more with Ian Gillan in the band, but unfortunately he would depart the group, but then he would reunite with Deep Purple and release Perfect Strangers, so I guess it all worked out. Great album here, and I do wish that they would have done some kind of a reunion on the side with Ian Gillan, similar to what they did with Ronnie James Dio in the mid-2000s, but great stuff here on this album. It's criminally underrated and definitely belongs in the top 10, in my opinion, from 1983. The only Black Sabbath record with Ian Gillan on lead vocals here, Born Again. For my number 8, how about Mob Rules from 1981? The second Black Sabbath record with Dio on lead vocals here, and this would be the last time Ronnie James Dio would appear on a Black Sabbath album until 1992's Dehumanizer, a little over a decade later. It's also the first Sabbath record with Vinny Appice on the drums, replacing Bill Ward here in the band, and this is an amazing record. Very similar in style to Heaven and Hell from 1980, but it's almost like they made the same album twice here, but still, I think it's a great album, and it definitely doesn't affect the overall product, with some awesome tracks like Turn Up the Night, Voodoo, The Sign of the Southern Cross, which is just an absolute classic, definitely one of my favorite Sabbath songs. The Mob Rules, the title track, Country Girl is great, Falling Off the Edge of the World, over and over as well, so great tracks from beginning to end here, produced by Martin Birch. Like I was talking about before, it's very similar to Heaven and Hell, but nonetheless a great record and an awesome way for Ronnie James Dio to cap off his first tenure with Black Sabbath here in 1981. My number 8 is The Mob Rules. Entering the classic era of Black Sabbath here with my number 7, I'm going to go with Sabbath Bloody Sabbath from 1974. Amazing album here, and a lot of these early Sabbath records are extremely influential, with some awesome tracks like Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, the title track, which has some of my all-time favorite Black Sabbath lyrics. A National Acrobat, Fluff, is a really interesting instrumental here with some great playing by Tony Iommi. Sabracadabra, really awesome track. Killing Yourself to Live is great. Who Are You? Looking for Today, Spiral Architect to close things out. Great tracks from beginning to end here on this album. It's a classic for a reason, and definitely some of my all-time favorite Black Sabbath cover art as well. That is just killer, and in general, it's an amazing album here from 1974. My number 7 on the list. Gotta go with Sabbath Bloody Sabbath. Right around here, this list got extremely hard to put together because every album that remains is an absolute classic, but next to number 6 here, I'm going to go with Volume 4, the fourth Black Sabbath record, and, you know, this is an album that I didn't take to immediately, but I've talked about this before on the channel, how over time I started to gravitate more towards the riffing on here by Tony Iommi, which is just exceptional. Some really doomy, sludgy, heavy riffs on here by Iommi, which definitely drew me to this album more and more. Great tracks on here like Wheels of Confusion, Tomorrow's Dream, Changes, Supernaut, Snowblind as well, Cornucopia, which has one of my all-time favorite Black Sabbath riffs, one of my all-time favorite riffs in general, actually. Laguna Sunrise, St. Vitus's Dance, Under the Sun as well. A really important record here when it comes to the formation of doom metal. Great album here by Black Sabbath. Their fourth studio record coming in at number 6 on the list, Volume 4. Top 5 now, and for my number 5, I'm going to go with Heaven and Hell from 1980. This was my introduction to Black Sabbath, so I've always had sort of a sentimental connection to this album. Great record here, the first with Ronnie James Dio replacing Ozzy Osbourne in the band, and like I've talked about many times before on the channel, Dio joining the group allowed the band to change up their sound here and have a creative rebirth, which was so important here to this new era of Black Sabbath. The Dio era is just fantastic, really, from beginning to end. This album is stacked with great track after great track after great track. Neon Nights, Die Young, the title track Heaven and Hell. Lady Evil is awesome as well. Lonely is the Word. Just killer song after killer song here on this record. Children of the Sea as well. How could I forget about that one? Amazing album here from beginning to end. The first of the Dio era, and like I said before, my introduction to Black Sabbath. Top 5 here, I'm going to go with Heaven and Hell. Next to number 4, I'm going to go with the album that started it all from 1970. Their debut record here, self-titled. Heavy metal history being made, with Black Sabbath just doing something different. Different from what everybody else was doing at the time. An ominous, doomy debut record here by Sabbath, with awesome tracks like the title track, Black Sabbath, The Wizard, Behind the Wall of Sleep, N.I.B., Wicked World, just great track after great track here on this album. Definitely the all-time best heavy metal debut record, and deserving of a spot in the top 5. Coming in at number 4 here, self-titled Black Sabbath, their debut album from 1970. Top 3 now, and for my number 3, I'm going to go with Master of Reality, the third Black Sabbath studio album, and another one of the most important metal albums ever made. An album that was crucial in the formation of doom metal as well, and there are just some amazing songs on here, like Sweet Leaf, After Forever, Children of the Grave, Lord of this World, Solitude, and then, of course, Into the Void to close things out. This album is stacked, and another one of the most important metal albums ever made here. The third Black Sabbath studio record, my number 3 here on the list, Master of Reality. Coming in now at number 2, I'm going to go with the sophomore Black Sabbath record from 1970, Paranoid. An incredible album here, and probably Black Sabbath's best-known record with some of their best-known material, like War Pigs, Paranoid, and Iron Man. But in addition to those tracks that we've all heard a million times over, there are also some really great lesser-known songs on here, like Planet Caravan, Electric Funeral, Hand of Doom, Rat Salad, Fairies Wear Boots too. So killer songs on here, really a stacked record from beginning to end, but because I've heard a lot of these tracks a million times over, they do tend to lose their luster over time. They are still classic tracks, but I've just heard them so many times that I don't really have much of a desire to hear them again, so that's the reason why it's at number 2 and not at number 1 here, but an amazing album nonetheless, and definitely one of the most important and best-known albums in the Black Sabbath catalog. And finally, coming in at number 1 here, in my opinion, the best Black Sabbath studio album from 1975 has got to be Sabotage, and this album, for me, is just everything that encapsulates 70s Sabbath. Just a killer record with everything that checks off the boxes for what it takes to be a classic Sabbath record here. You've got really cool lyrics, incredible instrumentation. Ozzy sounds great on lead vocals here with possibly his best vocal performance ever on Symptom of the Universe, and Bill Ward on the drums is fantastic as always. When it comes to some standout tracks here on this album, you got Hole in the Sky, Symptom of the Universe like I was talking about. Great song, super heavy, and again, Ozzy sounds incredible on that track. Megalomania, Super Czar, Am I Going Insane, The Writ as well. Great record here. The band are firing on all cylinders with an absolute killer album, and in my opinion, the best from that 70s string of records. My all-time favorite Black Sabbath album here from 1975, coming in at number 1 on the list. I gotta go with Sabotage. So that wraps up Ranking of the Grave, ranking Black Sabbath studio albums from worst to best, which should be visible right over here. And if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel down below, help me reach my goal of 700 subs. We're only 2 subscribers away, so if you've not subscribed yet to the channel and you're interested in checking out more content, please go ahead and subscribe to the channel, turn on the bell for notifications so you're notified of a new upload, and let me know down in the comments below, did you agree with my list? Did you disagree with my list? And what are some of your all-time favorite Black Sabbath records? I'd be very interested in hearing your opinions down in the comments, so let me know all that good stuff down there. And until next time, it's the CD guy, Johnny Z, signing off. Take care, everybody.